I can.
Well, it's I don't like.
Good morning, colleagues. On behalf of the Director General, Ministry of the Public Service, I welcome you to the first in the series of quarterly human resource webinars, a forum where we discuss human resource issues and the development of the human resources of the public service. With more employees working from home, it has never been more important for us to have the skills to manage workers effectively. Today's webinar is entitled Virtual Performance Management. My name is Sheldine Santwali, Senior Human Resource Officer with the Learning and Development Directorate in the Ministry of the Public Service, and today I will be your moderator. This webinar is brought to you by the Learning and Development Directorate in collaboration with the Human Resource Management Association of Barbados, Inc., HRMAD, and facilitated by its president or guest presenter, Ms. Brittany Brathwaite. Today, we explore ways of how employee performance is managed and monitored in a primarily remote environment. We also have with us Mrs. Faye Marie Brown, Director of the Learning and Development Directorate, who will share a sneak peek of an exciting development in our PRDS tool at a point in the webinar. We'd really like to hear from you and would like to include your voice in the conversation. But before we get there, here are some rules of engagement that we want to share with you. Of course, mute your microphone, disable your video, pause and minimize distractions as much as possible, focus fully on the presentation, reflect on your experiences. We want you to participate and of course share what you have learned in the chat. This helps us to achieve optimal benefit from our interaction by reducing feedback and increasing bandwidth. This session promises to be very interactive with time allotted for activities and a question and answer segment. You'll be given the opportunity to use the chat box and the raise hand feature and share your comments. Our team will be monitoring the chat space to share your questions and comments with the facilitator. At this point, I would like to introduce our featured presenter for today's webinar, Ms. Brittany Brathwaite, and she is the president of the Human Resources Management Association and member of the Human Resources Development Council of Barbados. Brittany is a graduate of the International Training Center of the International Labour Organization, Turin, Italy. She holds a master's in human resources from the University of Liverpool and an undergraduate degree in labor and employment relations from the University of the West Indies, Cave Hill campus. Brittany is a certified trainer and has also been certified in curriculum development through the Technical Vocational Education and Training Council of Barbados. I will now invite Brittany to share her screen with us and begin today's presentation. Over to you, Brittany.
Good morning, everyone. I'm really pleased to join you all this morning. I'm happy to be, collaborating with the Ministry of the Public Service. I think it's a step in the right direction. When I first spoke to your director, the enthusiasm around driving and continuing to drive human resources development in the public sector is not one that I've seen really before. And I really think it sets a fantastic tone for where these webinars will take you all and where it will take us as we join in collaborative spaces to really foster and develop our human resources capital at a national level. As mentioned by Sheldine, my name is Brittany Brathwaite, and I'm the current president of the Human Resources Management Association of Barbados. And this morning, we are going to be looking at virtual performance management and how we make it work. I'm going to, as far as reasonably practicable, ask for limited engagement. There are going to be some questions asked, and I'll ask you to respond in the chat box to those questions and provide guidance on how you should respond. Any generic or wider or more comprehensive questions you have, you can also feel free to drop in the chat box. Some of them I may be able to answer on the go. Others may have to be answered at the end of the session during the question and answer. I really look forward to engaging with you all for the next hour or so, and I am ecstatic for us to discuss the trends in virtual performance management. When we look at the objectives of today's session, we are going to have a brief look at the critical performance management factors. And I do believe that everyone who is joining us today and everyone on the call has a clear understanding, subject to all the training that is already provided by the Directorate on Performance Management and Performance Appraisals, what those critical factors look like. What we're going to look at centrally today will be how we stay ahead of the curve and what makes virtual and what is making virtual performance management work in public sectors across the world. And I'm also going to draw reference to some comparable structures. And when I say a comparable structure, we're going to draw reference to places like Singapore and smaller territories who have similar systems or structures in relation to their public sector setup. And I will draw references to the trends that are making their performance management work in a virtual setting. We're going to look at how you learn to let go and helping people to let go as you give them guidance as practitioners, how you assist them in creating a feedback rhythm, what's the importance of narrating, and what's the importance of leading by example, working out loud, and also some excellent tips on encouraging informal 360 feedback. And that will particularly be one of my favorite parts of these sessions because there's some very interesting tips being used, particularly in the European region. So just so we jump right into it, the basis. I think you guys start by having an advantage, and those people to whom you guide or provide guidance, they start at an advantage, and I think you need to help them to start there and understanding that as well. You have all the tools. You have all the tools to prepare you for a virtual performance management work setting, and they have all the tools to prepare them for a virtual performance management work setting. They have the goal setting and planning tool and process. They have the key performance indicators, or they all should have. There's a functioning PRDS, and there's, of course, a functioning performance appraisal tool. All of the things that form the basis or the plateau for an excellent virtual performance management system. Now, it's of course using these things and leveraging the positives in the context of COVID-19 that will make a fundamental difference. So what next? And when we talk about reinventing or making performance management work in a virtual setting, what next is the mindset. So when you have persons engaging and asking, how do we come around to managing people and dealing with performance management in a virtual setting? There is the mindset. That's the first point. You have to create a remote mindset. And just like any other habit, it's going to be hard to unlearn handling and dealing with performance management solely in a physical space. So understand that that may be one of the most difficult concepts that you will face as you give guidance to others. Their challenge with unlearning how to manage people in a physical space only. What that means is we need to drive what I'm calling the remote mindset. And you can kind of make that a bigger goal in your performance management strategic arena. Creating a remote mindset. So what are some critical questions that you should encourage persons to ask themselves once you're starting to create that critical mindset? And I'll ask you. So this is the first set of questions I'm going to throw out. I'm going to encourage you to answer either yes by responding Y in the chat box, or no by responding N in the chat box to the following question. How many of you believe the persons you provide guidance to, or even in your own teams, are comfortable when you think of your team members or their team, or you think they're comfortable when they think of their team members working for 4 hours in a day and getting the job done versus sitting for 8 hours in a day and still not getting it done? How many of you think the persons to whom you provide guidance are comfortable with their team members working a 4-hour day and getting the job done versus working an 8-hour day and not having the results that were required? So I'm seeing lots of ways so far. Any no's? And maybe I can twist that question. So continue to respond. I think we have about 103 people in here, so I'm hoping to see a lot of responses. And I can twist that question a little bit. So not just those who may be comfortable. How many of you are seeing persons effectively utilizing their teams and the time during this period? Would you say that that's been difficult for them? Would you say that in offering guidance, people are having difficulty with the performance management virtually? No from Selma, no from Jania. Do you think persons are having general difficulties? Some yes, some no's. No difficulty. Repeat the question. So the first question I asked was whether, in considering a work day, how many of you believe the persons to whom you provide guidance would have difficulty thinking that their team members can work a 4-hour day and get the job done versus having to work an 8-hour day? That's to Walcott J, who wanted me to repeat the question. You think that's challenging? Or does it make, and a question directly to you, because we would have spoken to those persons that you may be giving advice to, but it's also important that as practitioners, that you also have a remote mindset. Does that concept of persons working for a shortened, more concentrated period of time, because this is what can and will happen in remote work, and getting the job done versus having to work an 8-hour day, does that make you uncomfortable? Difficulties encountered due to high levels of trust between employers and employees. That's a very good answer. That's a very good point. Behold, here is water. What doeth hinder thee from being baptized? It is absolutely true that we have all the tools for effective management, and what is inhibiting persons from utilizing them. So that's a very good point. And that's the point I wanted to make from the get-go. It's important to understand that the tools exist. Now, using them. So Wendy Eversley says yes and no to the question about being uncomfortable. And I really want you to capture these key and essential questions, because as you're giving guidance and providing guidance as practitioners to persons across the public sector, these are the types of issues and discomfort that will come with remote work and trying to create a remote mindset. If these things make people uncomfortable, and it may be normal, and better work-life balance and improve employee morale, good question, good point. But these things make people uncomfortable because they're accustomed to seeing everyone 8 hours a day. They're accustomed to physically being able to tap into them 8 hours a day, or based on how they function in a work setting. And therefore, there's a lot of discomfort around the lack of visibility that remote work results in. And distilling those fears really start with very tactile and practical steps. And you see trust here. Someone in the chat mentioned trust. Key element, and we're also going to speak to that, and I will give you a very practical exercise that you can use as you render advice to persons across the public sector to kind of gauge what the trust and the rapport looks like in their teams. Lack of communication, also important, and we will get to that. Thank you very much, Foster G. So the first concept that we're going to look at is learning to let go. Henderson, I'm so grateful for your honesty. Letting go may make me feel as though I'm irrelevant. That's a very honest point. And we are going to look at how you balance that. So when you were physically present and you could see what people are doing and you can monitor physically, there is the sense of responsibility as an individual that is developed. And therefore that relevance that Henderson is speaking to in the chat, it exists far more when you're physically in a space. When you're managing remotely and you're looking at performance management remotely, that letting go almost makes you feel as though that relevance has slipped directly out of your hand. But again, the remote mindset. So learning to let go is more of an art and less of a science, because what that means is you find a way to let go that still leaves you in control. So trusting that your out of sight remote workers are getting work done means that you have to find a way to hold the reins while still letting go of the physical presence. And what does that look like? Defining and distilling these three things. What are you paying people for? What does your team deliver? So these are the things that as practitioners, you need to be giving guidance to managers and to team leaders on, for them to be asking these critical questions when they're having challenges with performance management. What does their team deliver? Do they know what that looks like? Do they understand the tasks? Is it distilled? What are individuals responsible for? And what are you paying people for? These are three very crystallized and very important questions. And regardless of where you go, these are the three questions that you see popping up around virtual performance management. Because when you learn to let go, once you understand the core of these three things, it provides a basis upon which you can still hold the reins. So I don't have to stand over a person and I don't have to physically see them there if when I check in with that person, I am sure about the results and the deliverables that we agreed on and where that person is in achieving those things. And that is really the art of letting go physically while holding on to the substantive things, and that those substantive things being the deliverables. And I see some very good points here, and I'm going to speak to a few of them as before I go further into learning to let go. And Marie mentioned that from recent experience, it seems to be a generational gap issue relating to trust of working remotely. And of course, generational diversity is one of the challenges that the public service particularly will face. And it will be all over the public service. What I do have a few tips on how you can overcome generational diversity. And we're going to look at that in relation to the 360 informal feedback method, Anne-Marie. So we'll get to that. I also saw Paul Leach mentioned the current work system is not task and result oriented, and it does not involve employees knowing what they need to do and being held responsible. I am, and I would have had, lots of robust discussion with the directorate prior to jumping into this session and to getting the session together. So I do know that you guys have the tools to ensure that your work system could in fact be task, result, and oriented. So I'm not quite going to answer that. I'm going to ask if maybe Faye would want to jump in to speak to that specifically so it doesn't get lost. Faye, are you there?
I am here.
Yes.
And good morning, everybody. Good morning to colleagues. I have been here trying to craft a response, to send Paul a response, coincidentally. And I want to suggest that the onus of having work goals and smart work goals and becoming task oriented lays very much at us. And I say us, HR practitioners, us as supervisors, us as managers, to ensure, as Joyanne Jarvis Blackman was saying, that we get results. It is not something that somebody's going to do for us, but as we move into this management role and as HR practitioners, part of the responsibility is definitely ours to ensure that we are task and goal oriented in whatever we do. And I'll pause there.
Great, thank you so much, Faye. And I want to remind you, Paul, that I started by making mention of all the tools that exist. So if you see that there's an absence, or if you feel like there is the absence of those things, it may mean that you're not properly utilizing the tools at your disposal. And even if you need assistance, I'm sure the directorate can lend the same. But the tools that you have are tools that would make really any public sector jealous, just because you have such robust tools at your disposal. So it's really how you put those things to use that will make the fundamental difference in having the task and the results goal oriented and distilling the answers to the questions in the learning to let go basis. So the next step in learning to let go, making work as visible as possible. And that transparency is imperative for virtual performance management. And just because, and Walcott J spoke to smarter goals and the RSCI system, but putting those things to work, and I think Joyanne's point was very important, the accountability. Now, accountability can only be kind of drawn out if you know what you're holding people accountable for. And therefore, the outputs have to be clear. If you're going to be performance managing people from a virtual setting, you have to be very clear as to what their outputs are, what you are looking for, what you are looking to assess. The task to reach outputs should really be delineated, and you have excellent software available, the approved software through the public service, and I believe through the Learning Directorate, is Microsoft Teams. The directorate will speak to, when training, etc., may be happening for the same. But I also personally use Microsoft Teams, and I would have mentioned yesterday to the team that it's one of the most comprehensive softwares that exists, just because it has a project management software board, it has task boards, and therefore the tools that we spoke to initially that you have being, the progress reports and the PRDS systems and how they're broken down into quarters, those tools can actually be uploaded into Teams, and you track your task and your progress reports in a very transparent way. And therefore the outputs become clear to people in a way that you can all see and monitor. And it makes it a lot easier for work to become visible, but you really have to utilize the software and the platforms. Now, quantifying the results weekly and bi-weekly. It is going to be imperative to remove the concept of staunch, quarterly or bi-monthly check-ins or sit-ins with your teams if you are going to make virtual performance management work. You really have to bring those thinks or those discussions down to shorter periods, and looking and reviewing what is going on in relation to outputs far more frequently. In Europe, in the Icelandic territories where their public sector has gone through tremendous reform over the past 4 months, they have brought their system down to bi-weekly or fortnightly check-ins. And it's really worked for them. In Singapore, they have also brought their system down to monthly check-ins, but of course, intrinsically, their system is actually very similar to our PRDS system that we have. And they really have, even prior to COVID-19, made it work by having constant conversations with persons. And I saw somebody that mentioned in the chat the lack of leadership, but I think it is prudent for all of us to recognize, and all of us here to recognize, that if we make mention of a lack of leadership, we may have there's part of responsibility to ensure that any lack of leadership is a thing of the past, and part of that responsibility sits squarely with all of us on this call, because you too are leaders, and therefore you have to engender the leadership mindset and the remote mindset. And don't as long as you start talking about lack of leadership, it becomes something that permeates. Let's talk about what makes good leadership, and let's all live it. And I think that helps once you start to readjust how you think about leadership and how you act. Each and every one of you have a pivotal role to play in transforming the leadership that you want to see and that you want to live in the public sector. So if we talk about lack of leadership, let's also hold ourselves accountable and ensure that we are leading the way in which we would want to be led. Again, though, the quantification of the results bi-weekly, very, very good concept, and it takes away the rigor out of the performance appraisals, which we will still have to do, subject to your systems, but it takes away the nervousness when you bring those discussions down to more concentrated periods, because persons are very, very clear on what you want and on what is expected, just because you are meeting and you're understanding far more frequently than quarterly or biannually. Celebrated completed tasks and goals, and I say here it's a smart way of measuring deliverables, because it's one of the best things that I've seen in the public sector reformation across the world, and Australia is doing this. So yes, they've brought down their syncs or their discussions with people from being quarterly to being bi-weekly, so that they concentrate them and they hear from people more frequently and they understand where their goals are at. But they also tie celebrations to those things. And I mean, they're small celebrations and small virtual celebrations, so getting together to celebrate the completion of a project or the submission of a report. But if you can tie celebratory aspects to outputs, it creates the culture and the rapport of happiness around deliverables. And that is key in virtual performance management, because you don't have the physical space to get together and to clap hands and maybe to have a cake, etc. So to build your culture while also ensuring that deliverables are hit and timely hit would be an excellent way for all of you to foster the rapport with your teams, and while ensuring that virtual performance management is done. Are there any direct questions in relation to learning to let go? And I really want to throw out to any of you, do you think that this is learning to let go, and the points that we would have touched on are challenges that the persons to whom you give guidance to will face? And is there anything that I haven't touched on in relation to learning to let go that you may want to ask a quick question on before we move ahead? You can respond why to yes, everything was covered, or no with your question in the chat box if you have a question. And Foster G mentions the resistance to change, which is acknowledged. I think there's resistance to change anywhere, but we all have a pivotal role, as Faye Marie would have mentioned, we all have a pivotal role to play in helping persons to overcome any resistance to anything. And as leaders, I think if that resistance to change is something that is overwhelming, we have to find tactile and practical ways to overcome it. And we'll speak to some of those ways as I go forward. Again, though, and in relation to learning to let go as a synopsis, sorry. My screen was, there we go. The key to learning to let go really is increasing visibility of your team's work. With the lack of visibility, that's where the relevance or you feel as though people are slipping away. But once you increase visibility, you have an idea of a clear idea, not just an idea that is ambiguous, but a clear idea as to what those outputs look like, as to what those deliverables look like and what the impediments are around the same. It becomes a lot easier to performance manage virtually. And these are the things that you need to instill in the leaders to whom you are giving advice, that they need to utilize, one, the tools, but they also need to look at the practical steps of learning to let go. And I do like the idea of saying that learning to let go will be easier when you have responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed systems in place. But I leave that to the directorate to respond to. But I do really think, as I said, your systems are one that are to be envied. So it really you have to assess the utilization of the systems and how you may be putting them to work if you're thinking that the system is an impediment. Now, the next very important step, creating a feedback rhythm. And that rhythm is not just necessarily a person, you having a staunch check-in with or schedule check-in with your team member, or asking or guiding persons to have scheduled check-ins with their team members once a month. The feedback rhythm is really providing robust and comprehensive feedback. So scheduling regular one-on-ones to discuss the substantive issues, not just to list, okay, this was done, this wasn't done, get it done by next week. The questions would be, how are you not getting it done? What is going on? What more can you do? What more can we do to get you over the hump? So using different mediums for this one-on-one. As I said, Microsoft Teams is the approved system being utilized. I saw in the chat box somebody had mentioned that they use other systems, but the director has said Microsoft Teams is approved. And just before I jumped on this call, I was actually creating a group on Microsoft Teams for my primary workplace, and I'm going to tell you that it works fantastically. If you can get into the software and if you can utilize it, it is one of the best methods for creating a feedback rhythm. You can create specific channels for specific projects that you're working on, so people can discuss only that project in there. You can create specific task boards so people can update, and that feedback rhythm is through varying mediums on the same platform. And then, of course, finding innovative ways of engaging. What has really happened is that persons are virtually exhausted around the world. And I dare say here in Barbados, just because everyone has been attending webinars, everyone has been on Zoom quite a lot. And therefore, if we are going to make performance management work in a virtual setting, we have to find innovative ways to engage with our people. And there are three very innovative ways that I've seen brought to the fore by public sectors across the world. The first method being the 3-2-1-0-0 system. And that is, once you have a person who has their tasks or their goals clearly delineated, so you've achieved the learning to let go step and you have visibility around what people are doing, you set, let's say, bi-weekly check-ins. In that bi-weekly check-in, you categorize the tasks that persons are asked to be doing, and they then assign a grading. And this is, of course, an informal feedback rhythm because we're talking about performance management, so it's ongoing. And they assign a grading to those tasks, 3 being highest, 0 being the lowest. And these gradings provide a basis for talking points for you in your check-ins. So if a person has an OO assigned to all of their tasks, then you know that there's an OO going on in them reaching their ultimate deliverable. And it prompts you to really have a deeper discussion around what is wrong, what is holding you back. Is it that you're facing challenges with the work-life balance? Are things busy? Is it that you are not quite having the tools based on the person may not have a printer, etc.? Are those discussions happening? That 3-2-1 OO system I really love because it's not overly fancy. It's not overly convoluted. Ask people to grade their task and where they're at in that task by the 3, the 2, the 1, or the OO. And you as leaders guide them on utilizing this system and using that grading as a talking point. Recordings and playbacks, and that's the next innovative method. Not one that I have tried, but I really look forward to doing it. And let's walk through what recordings and playbacks really look like in creating a feedback rhythm. So it suggests that you ask employees or you ask the persons whom are being reviewed informally in performance management to record themselves discussing the challenges or the positives that they've had. Let's say you're doing your check-in every 2 weeks or monthly, in the past month or in the past 2 weeks. And in that recording, you ask them to be as honest and as frank as possible about the positives and the negatives. And then leaders play that recording back. What we found and what research is increasingly proving is because persons are in, remote working teams so much, that they're actually being far more honest when they are by themselves recording and discussing their work on what is happening. And that playback allows the manager to see honestly what's going on with this person and engage based on what was recorded. Very novel trend and very trendy, but it really does work. And in creating that feedback rhythm, the recording and the playbacks may not be something you want to do every week because you don't want a person having to record themselves every week. But the recordings and the playbacks could be something you use monthly. And it could almost be like a little diary for you guys to develop and for you to advise your persons across the different ministries to develop. And a virtual diary around what is happening. Just a point here that Microsoft Teams also offers that system. So you can record and play back on Microsoft Teams. So again, you have the tools to make these things work. And then the third and final very simple, innovative feedback rhythm could be, I want to, I feel like, I don't want to. So categorizing tasks and your goals by assigning one of these statements to them. And as you give leaders advice about creating feedback rhythms, this could be one of the really phenomenal things that they do. So you could advise someone in a ministry to say, use Microsoft Teams and create a channel called I Want To, and have your team on Monday drop all the things that they want to do in that channel. Also create a channel that says, I feel like. I have them drop in there, and a separate channel called I Don't Want To. And as a leader, you can then distill the things that are put into the I Don't Want To box and have conversations with those persons who may have challenges based on that I Don't Want To or the task in that channel. And it really creates a fun, different way of engaging rather than, everyone getting on these Zoom calls, turning off the mics, turning off the cameras, nobody really engaging, just saying good morning and good evening. You want to have a rhythm to feedback that continues, a real substantive discussion. Because what you don't want in virtual performance management is to lose the essence of that feedback. Once the feedback and that rhythm is lost, then you have challenges in identifying where persons are not getting their work done, and therefore ultimately why deliverables are not being met. And this one, I would say for me personally, and I will throw this question out to you also, has been a real biggie. How many persons have found that communication and accessibility have been one of the biggest challenges in managing persons' performance remotely. And you can say Y for yes, N for no. For me, it is 3 Ys. And I'll give you an example. I had a team member whose biorhythm, and I give this example in every session I give, that person's biorhythm is between like 11 p.m. at night and 6 a.m. And therefore, when we first moved into the remote setting, Anne-Marie put like 5 Ys. I feel you, Anne-Marie. When we first moved into the remote setting, everyone would kind of work during the day, but that person would work at night. And of course, they felt justified in working at night because they were working. It's just, of course, when persons who were working during the day needed things done, they weren't getting them done because, of course, the person was sleeping. And what is important then is creating explicit communication agreements. Agreeing to the time frames that you expect responses and emails, and responses to your emails. Creating innovative flags for unavailability. And I have the second bullet point, the creation of a charter, but I skipped that because your directorate is so proactive. I am actually going to be able to share what the learning directorate would have created for themselves, which is a communication and boundaries agreement. And this is something that maybe you can consider. Well, let me ask Faye to speak on this, because I can't speak to whether this template that I will share will be shared or whether you'll be asked to create your own thing. Faye, could you join in?
We have no problem.
I'm just going to share the thing. Yes.
Yes, you can. While I speak, you can bring it up. But we have certainly no problem in sharing it for other ministries and departments to use as a template. We thought that this was important for us in the virtual environment, and then particularly even as we return to work and still in somewhat of a hybrid environment between virtual and physical. And we thought we'd set an internal standard in terms of how we communicate our boundaries, and in so doing, promote better work-life balance for all of our employees. So for instance, we set standards that say we will acknowledge email when full responses will be given, that we will check our inboxes, our telephone inboxes. We talk about how we will collaborate. So we use Teams and Zoom. I think we even talked about when we will Zoom meetings with clients, just a bit. And even when we will have meetings, what hours during working time, and how we will check in. So some of us work remotely. Managers and supervisors are encouraged to check in daily with your remote team members. And to that last one, we can't underscore it enough. We make mistakes, we misunderstand, we inadvertently let things slip through the cracks. Mistakes are not to be frowned on, but they're to be used to learn from. And in all instances, to remember that being accountable for our actions, remaining professional, speaks volumes. So this is what we are guided by in learning and development.
And as I said, it's really proactive, because this is exactly what I'm recommending in the slides. Establishing a formal agreement. And for some places, when I read the research on it, some persons were saying, maybe this is an overdue. But I really say that these agreements are exactly what organizations who are working remotely need. Because then if you don't have them, it leaves everything else to chance, right? So persons assume, if I work best at night, I'll work at night. And we may think persons should not have those assumptions, but we've seen them come to the fore. And I love that this is called communications and boundaries, because one of the things that has happened in remote work settings around performance management is persons feel as though they can kind of tap in anytime. They kind of don't know when to cut off. And I think the directorate was really detailed in listing here even the external meeting times. So as early as and no later than. And though that kind of detail is really imperative, I see some calls for it to be established across the public service, but of course, Faye, I'll leave that to you.
We will share our template.
Right, okay.
Perhaps with the recording of this presentation slides that we would normally send out, we'll also send out our guide that you can customize it to suit your own environments.
Perfect. So again, that agreement is really setting the standard. It really sets the standard for where remote work in relation to performance management needs to go if you are looking at closing that communication bridge. Because it's not going to happen by having conversations in silos. And that's also another thing. We usually have conversations, or we will have a team meeting and we'll tell everybody, you know, this is what is expected, guys, and ensure that it happens. But monitoring that implementation is a lot more difficult when people are not physically there. And therefore, these explicit agreements have really worked to close the barriers that exist around understanding what people want and what they don't want. Identifying problems early is where we go next. And this really comes under the working out loud catchment. And what does working out loud mean? It's literally bringing your work to the fore, and so everybody understands what's happening before there is chaos. So a consideration you would give to an employee, think about it. If you are picking up the phone to raise a problem with your manager, when you haven't had a decent conversation in however long, and this is one of the critical characteristics of performance management, you don't leave things for a showdown. You simply don't leave bad news or good news for a showdown. So I always use the example of, in performance management, of my mother. And when I was very young, my mother would, and she would call it literally storing up licks in Bajan parlance. And sometimes I would, you know, go months without having lashes, and I would be like, great, she's obviously forgotten what is happening and what I'm doing, you know, and I behave as I want to. And then I get lashes one day, and then as she's lashing me, there are all of these things that she's bringing up. And this is what it feels like when you don't work out loud. Because if you're only engaging with your manager, or you are only giving advice to persons to engage with their team members when things are wrong, that's literally what it feels like to them. It feels like you only leverage this relationship when something is wrong or when there's chaos. If you were to have ongoing discussions about what is going on, what is going wrong, and what is going right consistently, then it provides that honest and genuine basis for having difficult conversations when the times come. So rather than having to end up having a chaotic conversation or constantly outing fires, work out loud. Ask your team members and give guidance to managers to ask their team members what is wrong. If you're using the 3-2-1-0-0 method, please don't only stick and look at the 3 tools, the 3 and the 2s. And when you see the 1 and the O's and the 0's, you tell people, you know, well, you need to fix that. By the time we have these deliverables, you need to fix that. That's not what you want. You need to focus on those 0's, because if you can identify where the stumbling blocks are very early in the game, it avoids you having to deal with chaos later. Just 1 second, I'm having a bit of trouble viewing the chat. It avoids you having to deal with chaos later in the game, and that's important. So work out loud, and dependent on the method you're using, this working out loud can be very easy. What I would say is it becomes a bit tougher if you don't have great rapport with and if the persons to whom you're giving advice, they don't have great rapport with their team members. That's where sometimes the challenges really rear their head, because people are less inclined to have the honest conversations about the OOs or the I don't want tos when they have never really had that relationship with their leadership. So I'd really encourage you, as you give advice to persons across the public sector, that they have the more difficult conversations more frequently, and they bring those talking times down, rather than every quarter, bring them down to every 2 weeks, and focus on the harder things rather than only the positives, so that you have the rapport being built and people are comfortable in bringing these concerns up. It also stops chaos. And remember that this is why performance management pretty much exists, to stop chaos. Because if in the absence of performance management, what you have is picking up errors and chaos very late in the game. And that really, it doesn't work. Can you tell me where to find the information on the methods like 32100? Yes, I will provide that, all of the links to all of the research and points that I would have referenced here. I'll provide that to the directorate and it will be shared. Encouraging informal 360 feedback. This I love, absolutely love, and I'm actually going to try it myself. You would, of course, have your 360 feedback entrenched in your formal system. But what is being propelled in the remote work system is to, and the remote performance management systems would be to have the 360 enshrined in your informal system as well. And by doing so, you get people talking about the difficulties amongst themselves and giving constructive feedback. And yes, good point, Henderson. So some people do, in fact, take things personal, and they would, in fact, listen to their colleagues sometimes better than they may listen to their managers. Now, please note, this 360 feedback is not to be used in isolation. So this is not to replace having or to give guidance to persons to have one-on-ones. They're to be used in tandem. So persons are still supposed to speak directly, to their teams and to their ministries, but they should also use the informal 360 feedback method. And you can use a pairing method if you so desire. And the pairing method can be used, again, through Teams. As I said, excellent platform. You create a channel with 2 or 3 persons, and you ask them to provide feedback on a specific project. And it could be positively structured feedback or constructive feedback. And you allow them to have that conversation. You can also use the recording and playback method for this informal 360 feedback, because you can have them have direct calls where the manager, and you tell the manager to sit out of that call, and that call just happens between 2 colleagues. It's recorded and the manager is allowed to view it after, so that he or she sees what the 360 feedback is like in the forum and what substantively is coming out. And even if you don't want to do the recording or the feedback, or you don't want to do a channel, you can pair people up in your weekly or your bi-weekly syncs or your monthly syncs. So rather than just having the meeting with, you're giving guidance to people to have meetings with their teams and they're the only ones talking, make a suggestion that maybe one team meeting a month is actually a team meeting that persons are paired off, and they have sub meetings, and those sub meetings are recorded and they're about feedback, and then the manager can view that. So again, this 360 informal feedback method really is an innovative way to get persons providing feedback, and I really think it builds very well on creating the feedback rhythm that we were just talking about. So this is another very good practical element to feedback. Cutting the email, into talking, but not too much. And what we've really seen during COVID-19 and post-COVID-19 in relation to working and performance management virtually is that everybody's sending emails, everybody's having Zoom meetings, but the substantive things sometimes are not distilled. So finding that balance is very important. I think once the communication and boundaries template is shared, that can very much help those who are having this challenge to find that balance. I think it provides the framework for balancing feeling overworked because you're virtually working, or not having persons deliver enough. And that explicit framework is really a good guidance tool to ensure that not too much, but just enough is being done in relation to communication. Now, one quick exercise before we head into our wrap up. I'm going to ask you to ask yourself these questions, and I'm going to throw them out there. And can we get the responses in the chat box very quickly? So, are you open and transparent? Yes or no? And I'll actually answer some of these things. But are you open and transparent? And when I say open and transparent, we're going to talk also about narrating your work. Do you think you're open and transparent with your teams? It could be yes, no, or sometimes. Because for me, I think it's sometimes. I'm not always as transparent as I should be. Do you provide sometimes, as some people are being honest, sometimes, do you provide recognition or praise for a job well done? I'd say not as often as I should, if I'm being very honest. Do you communicate well? Yes, yes, it helps, but I need to increase. I agree, Anne-Marie. I'd also answer. Would you say that your person, would your employee say that you value their point of view? Mostly, yes, yes. Yes, room for improvement. And would your employees say that you make wise business decisions, or do they even know the decisions that are made? I hope so. Yes. Yes. And really, that's a very simple trust exercise that you can use as you provide guidance to persons across the public sector. And that trust exercise helps to determine the level of rapport that exists. So every time I do it, it always tells me where I need to improve, as long as I am being honest with myself. It helps me to improve the rapport with my team. And it's very simple. And again, you'll have these slides, so you can also use it when you're giving advice to persons. What I have found that helps is, whenever I do that exercise and I come up lacking in an area, I try to create a team goal, or I give, and what you can do is, if either yourself or the people to whom you're giving advice come up lacking in a specific area, you can give them the concept of providing or creating a team goal. And that team goal can be to close that trust gap. So I found that I was not really sharing enough with my team. I really was not, in this period, because it got extremely hectic, we were really not engaging as often as I thought we should be. And therefore, I created something called a bi-weekly read. So every Thursday, we get together, and the Thursday before, somebody puts a read, a TED Talk, something interested in one of our channels on Slack, and we read it all together. We come and we give our feedback. Some people drink wine while we're there, and we talk about this bi-weekly read. And during that time, I also update them on what's going on and what changes are happening. So I'd encourage you to use this very practical thing when you're guiding persons, or even for yourselves, creating a goal that is aligned to that trust exercise that will close wherever the gap may exist in the trust or rapport building with your team. And this is just my example, as I said. But what is important, and this really is the synopsis of all that we've talked about. We talked about learning to let go. We talked about, using the practical things to drive feedback and creating your feedback rhythm, being explicit around communication. And what this all looks like is being present. You have to be present. The persons to whom you're giving advice, if you are giving advice but they are not taking it, you really need to make your presence felt to ensure that they are following the advice, and the leadership that you want to see being brought about in the public service is being done. So follow up with people, ensure that they're implementing what you're advising, ensuring that they're using the tools. So be present. I heard Faye use a term, flexing your muscle, and flex your muscle with persuasion. And that persuasion looks like follow-up. It looks like ensuring that they're getting what they said they would have done. It looks like ensuring they're using the excellent tools that they have at hand and kind of not leaving it to the wind. Be adaptable. And there's no time like this time to be adaptable and to be agile. Be honest. Find the areas that you can drive positivity. Check in as you give guidance with people. Check in as well, because those persons to whom you're giving guidance who are expected to be leaders, they also need sometimes a fallback and for somebody to kind of guide them continuously. So ensure that you're checking in and drive the growth strategy for the overall public service while you're doing all of these things. A very quick exercise before we close. I want everyone to share in the chat box the superhero that they think would best align with their personality, or that their teams would call them. And Michael, I hope that these pictures are acceptable to you. So I'm going to encourage everybody to drop their superhero in the chat box. The best example I've had thus far was somebody calling themselves Godzilla. And he said his team would call him Godzilla because he gets things done, but he goes about it in a very, very rough way. So he can destroy a city. If anybody remembers Godzilla, he can destroy a city, but he can get the job done. So can I get everybody to drop what superhero they think they would align with their personality, or what the persons to whom they give advice or their team members would call them? I don't see any superheroes so far. Can I get Faye or Wonder Woman? Batman. That's very interesting. I'm going to pick one person as I see these things. I'm going to pick one person to share why they would have selected Hank Voight. I've never heard of that superhero. That's very interesting. Anybody else? Anybody from the directorate dropping their superhero? Media. Is that a superhero, or that's just, I don't know if that's a superhero. I've never heard of that one. That's very interesting. Olivia Pope. I love that. Shira. Oh boy, that's Maynard. That's a bit far. Anybody else? Anyone else? And it may not be a superhero. It may be a person that they call you or that you remind them of. I love that Sonia said Olivia Pope, Catwoman. And I'm going to ask everybody to continue to drop the things in, but I'm going to ask quickly, Foster G, if you're available, can you tell me why you chose Hank Voight? I've actually never heard of that superhero. Can you describe what that superhero, who that superhero is, and why you selected that person? Hank, are you available? If you aren't available, I can quickly select someone else. It doesn't seem as though Hank is available, but we have a lot of Olivia Popes in our midst. So we saw I saw three Olivia Popes. So we have a lot of fixers, and we have a Shira. Very, very interesting. But you can also ask the persons to whom you render advice to use this exercise, because it really speaks to our characteristics as leaders. And it's as simple as this. What characteristics do you see in yourself as a leader? What do you think is missing? What do you think is positive about the characteristics? Or Hank Voight is the head of Chicago PD department in the TV series. Okay, thank you, Sonia. What characteristics do you see as being present and overwhelming in these characters, and what characteristics are missing? And use this to leverage them assessing themselves. I love some of the things that are coming in. People are saying Dr. Xavier. I love them. Margaret Thatcher, excellent series. Okay, so as we wrap up, remember that helping change and adaptability really means that you have to look at how you show people and how you're leading by example around the benefits of change. And somebody mentioned very early that change is hard. Change is hard, but it is not impossible. And it really starts with getting our mindset there. So leverage the benefits. Let people see the benefits in remote work, and that will drive how performance management is better handled in this forum. Are you leading by example? Are you sharing the information? Are you sharing with your team members? Do you convey what is going on, the changes across ministries, the things that will impact them? Are you a sharer as a leader? Are you guiding people to be sharing leaders? Or are you guiding them to be hoarders, and therefore their team members don't feel as though they can engage? And have you thought about how the industry, or have you thought about how the public service and the specific industry within the public service that that person is leading may be changing, and what that change means for their team members? And those concepts will help people to manage change and adaptability a lot more if you keep sharing information, if you be proactive in your thoughts. So I actually think the communication and boundaries template that the directorate created is one of those proactive things. And think about how your environment and how their environments are changing, and how they can so also be proactive. Can they create things that can guide their teams and based on the trends they're seeing that are difficult? So again, be intentional and consistent with contact. Understand the power of need, and via your feedback rhythm, understand what people need. Is it that they need a lot of help because they have a lot of OOs? Is it that they're in the recordings, they're sharing that they're having a lot more difficulties than you recognize? Understand the power of the needs, particularly of the people that you are guiding as practitioners. Leverage the positives in this situation. Performance management in a virtual setting is really great because you have all the tools. So start by creating that positive mindset and that remote mindset, by letting them understand that you have all you need. It's about utilization. And again, foster a culture of productive communication. And these things really are the things that can keep you ahead of the curve in ensuring that performance management is thriving and alive in the public sector, post-COVID-19 and post-COVID, post anything, because I believe performance management can thrive based on the tools you have and all at your disposal wherever you are in the world in the public sector. So what I am, silent and proper communication don't gel. That's very true, Sanjeen. But again, you have to foster the right culture for persons to believe that they don't need to be silent, but that there is a way to manage conflict, and to get over difficult issues in performance management by having those constructive conversations. So at this juncture, I'm going to turn over to Mrs. Faye Marie Brown. I believe Faye Marie has a sneak peek of something exciting to share with the entire team. So I will turn over the screen to Ms. Faye Marie Brown.
Okay. Thank you. Before I share our sneak peek, I want to thank Brittany and the Human Resources Management Association of Barbados for collaborating with us. And as she said at the beginning, is a signal of a partnership, of a collaboration that didn't exist before. And I really want to thank her for sharing so many ideas with us this morning. I personally learned a lot. I love the idea of the feedback rhythms, and I really am going to try, Brittany, to do the one I want to, I feel like, I don't want to. I'm going to use that in teams, so that's a hint to my team. And the informal 360 feedback is actually a wonderful tool for all of us as HR practitioners to try to get a gauge of how effective we are in our role and as we lead as in HR activities. I also want to thank you, the participants, for responding so overwhelmingly with to our call for this webinar. This wasn't just any ordinary webinar, to be honest with you. We wanted to test the waters to see how you would respond to a webinar only for HR practitioners. We are of the view that we need to have collaboration with HR professionals in the public service, that we need to empower each other as HR practitioners, that we can implement change in the public service from where you sit, wherever you sit in the public service, that you can truly flex your muscles as HR professionals and make a difference in your ministries and departments. So we want to say to you that your participation was very appreciated. And we are thinking that this gives us the foundation to develop an HR forum where we come together probably quarterly or maybe monthly to one, have a guest presentation on some kind of issue, challenge, area of HR, and to share information across ministries and departments so that you know firsthand what's happening and that you can start to discuss and distill what will be the HR implications for you in your ministry, for your ministries. Is this something that you would be interested in? Yet, Y for yes, no, N for no. This helps us then in terms of working out how we move forward. Would you find a forum for HR practitioners useful? Excellent, excellent, excellent. Thank you so much. You help to make us relevant, so we thank you. So, you have been asking for it for years now, remember? When the PRDS forum gonna become virtual, when we gonna get to do this online instead of filling out all these pages? And so we had been working on it before COVID, but like everything else, COVID just pushed us. And today we are pleased to say to you that we finally have finished that form, and I want to be able to share, to give you the sneak peek that you deserve to see for just showing up here today. So let me see how I'm going to do this with you. And my team would tell you that I like glitz and glamour and drum beats and confetti and balloons. I want to do this properly. So it's coming, it's coming. Just stay tuned, stay tuned. It's coming, I promise. And promising you, yeah, I'm going to share my screen again. And now I'm going to show you what that form looks like. Ta-da! So with this form, you can actually type into it directly, into your dates. You can move from section to section. You can set up your signatures. For instance, when the employee is finished with their work plan and the supervisor and the two have agreed on the work plan, seamlessly you can email it to your next level supervisor for signature, for comments, and we can do this for the whole process from the start of the year to the end of the year. There are going to be some things that you will need to manage at your end in the ministries and departments. Like for instance, you're going to probably have to have somebody coordinate it. But we are going to go through this form with you. So I want you to stay tuned. I'm just going to scroll right down so that you can see what I'm talking about. So that was essentially the first page on the physical form. Your work plan is here. You have the option of attaching job descriptions. You have a lot of typing space now. You don't have to copy pages and staple onto a form. You can make notes in your progress meeting quarterly and your appraisal meeting, enter your information, etc. So I am very excited to be able to go through this with you. And I want you to stay tuned because the next time you hear from us, we will be having some TOTs on a first come, first serve basis. Not for true, just kidding. We will do some TOTs, much like how we are doing Microsoft Teams, where we'll ask ministries to send us their HR persons so that we can go through how you use this web-based form. I am very excited about getting started on this process. And you do not have to wait until next financial year. As far as we are concerned, we're at the end or wrapping up the first quarter. You can start by entering what you had agreed on into the web-based form and just going from there, picking up for your first progress meeting. Good. It will be available to all ministries, Deborah, for sure. All right. So we are trying to make work happy and easier for you. At this stage, we started with Sheldine, and I think it is only fitting that we turn the time back to Sheldine. And if you have, Brittany has been answering questions, but let's hear where Sheldine is going to guide us right now. Thank you, colleagues.
Thank you, Faye. And of course, we want to thank Brittany for that interesting and engaging presentation. And I know that as HR practitioners, we're already beginning to think differently about or give thought to performance management in a virtual space and how best it can be achieved. We heard about trends that are making performance management work in a virtual setting and the difficulties and positives that come with this, creating a remote mindset, getting the job done, learning to let go, using the ICT tools in tracking progress and giving feedback, making work visible, virtual celebrations, creating a feedback rhythm. And to top it all off, we've just been introduced to the makings of our virtual PRDS form, which may make life, or which will make work-life happy. We should be happy where we work. And Faye has encouraged us to stay tuned for any further developments. At this stage, I just want to remind you of a training drive which we are having in the application MS Teams, and this is a communication and collaboration tool to create that virtual space to interact with your colleagues. Very useful tool to facilitate that kind of interaction. And so by now, it really should have made its presence to your ministries. And if you haven't seen it yet, do give us a call and we'll be sure to give you some information as to when your ministry has been scheduled for training. And we want to encourage you to give some thought to the template which will allow you to have set up those communication and boundaries guidelines. Some of you may still have questions and thoughts. We still encourage you to place them in the chat and we will do our best to address them in our information to you. This is all the time we have for our webinar today, and Brittany and Faye, it's really been a pleasure working with you. And on behalf of the team at the Learning and Development Directorate, we want to thank you so much for your intervention at this time. We are certainly more enlightened on the idea of performance management in a virtual world, and some of the attitudes and tools which are required to navigate successfully. And to you, the participants, of course, we thank you for your participation and interaction and encourage you to reach out to your colleagues by sharing some of the information imparted to you today. I also want to say thank you to our production team here at LDD. Please look out for a follow-up email that will contain a copy of the recording of today's webinar and a PDF of the slides so that you can review any information that you missed. We also invite you to subscribe to our YouTube channel to review recent webinars and to be updated on any new content posted. On behalf of the Director General, as well as the team here at the Learning and Development Directorate, thank you for joining us. I'm Sheldine Santwali. Have a great day and goodbye for now.